The scar across Madeline O'Hara's cheek caught the morning light as she stared at her reflection in the small hand mirror. The wound still pink and tender, though it had been nearly 6 months since the fire that claimed her family's ranch and everyone she'd ever loved. She gently traced the raised line that ran from her temple to her jaw, accompanied by several smaller marks that stretched down her neck and disappeared beneath her high-necked blouse, constant reminders of what she had lost and what she had become. Winnemucca, Nevada, 1876, was not the place she had imagined starting over, but with nothing left of her life in Colorado, she had followed the rail line west until her meager savings couldn't take her any further. The bustling mining town nestled in the desert landscape of northern Nevada offered anonymity at least, a place where she could hide both her past and her scars. Madeline tucked the mirror back into her carpetbag and adjusted her bonnet, pulling the brim low over the right side of her face before stepping out onto the boardwalk. The morning air carried the scent of dust and sage, mingling with the smoke from the blacksmith's forge and the warm aroma of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. She kept her head down as she made her way toward Mrs. Fairchild's boarding house, where she'd secured not only a room but also a position helping with the cooking and cleaning. "Miss O'Hara," called Mrs. Fairchild from the porch as Madeline approached, the older woman's round face creased with a smile. "I've just received word that the Mercantile is looking for someone to help with inventory and serving customers. I mentioned your name to Mr. Peterson. He'd like to meet you this morning if you're interested." Madeline hesitated. Working at the Mercantile would mean being on display, facing people directly instead of hiding in the kitchen or upstairs with the laundry. But she couldn't survive on the pittance Mrs. Fairchild could afford to pay her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll go see him now." The bell above the door jingled as she entered Peterson's Mercantile. The shop was empty of customers at this early hour, the shelves neatly stocked with dry goods, tools, fabric, and sundries needed for life on the frontier. "Be right with you," called a voice from the back room. Madeline stood nervously, fingers fidgeting with the strings of her reticule. When Mr. Peterson emerged, his friendly expression faltered as his gaze landed on the visible portion of her scar. "Miss O'Hara, I presume?" His recovery was quick, but she had seen the momentary shock in his eyes. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Fairchild said you might be looking for help." The interview was brief, his questions perfunctory. When he promised to let her know about the position, Madeline understood what that meant. She had seen that same look too many times since the fire, pity quickly masked by discomfort. As she stepped back onto the boardwalk, she fought back tears. She needed work, real work that would allow her to save enough to perhaps move on, somewhere bigger where her scars wouldn't be the first and only thing people noticed about her. "Whoa there, look out." The warning came too late as Madeline, head down and vision blurred by unshed tears, collided with something solid. She stumbled backward, losing her footing on the edge of the boardwalk, and braced herself for the fall, but it never came. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her before she could tumble into the dusty street. "I'm so sorry, madam. Didn't see you coming around that corner." Madeline looked up into the face of a man she'd never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark blonde hair was slightly too long, curling at the edges of his Stetson, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wore the practical garb of a working cowboy: denim pants, a faded blue shirt open at the collar, leather vest, and dust-covered boots with well-worn spurs. For a moment she forgot herself, forgot to turn her scarred cheek away, and when his gaze traveled over her face she stiffened, waiting for the usual reaction. but the warmth in his eyes never faltered. "You all right, miss?" he asked, releasing her arms once she was steady. "Yes," she said, hastily turning her head to hide her scars. "Thank you, I wasn't watching where I was going." "Weston Calloway," he said, tipping his hat. "Just rode in from the Circle S ranch, and you are?" "Madeline O'Hara," she replied softly, surprised at his easy manner. "Excuse me, Mr. Calloway, I should be going." "Wait," he called as she turned to leave. "You wouldn't happen to know if Peterson's has any .44 cartridges in stock, would you? I've got a long ride back to the ranch and I'm running low." "I wouldn't know," she answered. "I don't work there." "Ah, shame. You look like you'd be good with numbers." He flashed a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Well, Miss O'Hara, perhaps I'll see you around town." She nodded politely and hurried away, confused by the encounter. He had seen her scars, she was certain of it, yet he'd acted as though they weren't there at all. By the time Madeline returned to the boarding house, she had convinced herself that Mr. Calloway simply hadn't noticed her disfigurement in the brief encounter. Mrs. Fairchild was waiting for her, a concerned expression on her face. "Oh dear, I just heard from Emily Peterson," her father said. "Well, he felt you might not be suited for working with the public." The kindly widow looked genuinely distressed. "I'm so sorry, Madeline. People can be so short-sighted." "It's all right," Madeline replied, though it wasn't. "I understand." "No, it isn't all right," Mrs. Fairchild said firmly. "But I may have another option for you. The Circle S Ranch is looking for a cook. The owner, Mr. Samuel Calloway, is getting on in years, and his son has just taken over most of the operation. They've got 15 men working the place, and the previous cook left to get married last month. They're desperate enough that they sent young Mr. Calloway into town specifically to find someone." Madeline's heart quickened. "Weston Calloway? Why, yes, do you know him? We met briefly today." Madeline considered the opportunity. Working at a ranch would mean being out of the public eye. She could cook without facing constant stares, and the pay would surely be better than what she earned at the boarding house. "Do you think they would consider me?" "I already spoke to Weston about you when he came asking if I knew of anyone. He seemed quite interested when I mentioned you were looking for work." Madeline doubted that, assuming Mrs. Fairchild was simply being kind, but she couldn't afford to dismiss the opportunity. "When could I speak with him about it?" "He said he'd be at the Silver Dollar Saloon around noon, having lunch before heading back to the ranch. You could meet him there." The thought of entering the saloon made Madeline uneasy, but her need for employment outweighed her discomfort. At noon, she found herself standing outside the establishment, gathering her courage. The Silver Dollar was one of the more respectable saloons in Winnemucca, serving meals alongside its whiskey, but it was still no place for a lady alone. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the batwing doors. The interior was dimly lit compared to the bright Nevada sun outside, and it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. Several heads turned her way, men pausing over their drinks and card games to regard the unexpected female visitor. She spotted Weston Calloway at a corner table, his hat resting on the seat beside him as he cut into a steak. As if sensing her presence, he looked up, a flash of recognition crossing his features before he stood. "Miss O'Hara," he called, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please join me." She made her way through the room, acutely aware of the eyes following her. Weston pulled out the chair for her, and she sat quickly, keeping her scarred side angled away from the room. "This is an unexpected pleasure," he said, resuming his seat. "Can I order you something? The steak here is surprisingly good for a mining town." "No, thank you. Mrs. Fairchild mentioned that you're looking for a cook for your ranch," she said, getting straight to the point. His eyebrows rose slightly. "She did? Well, she's right." We are in need of someone who can prepare decent meals for hungry men. The boys are getting tired of my father's attempts at stew." "I'm a good cook," Madeline said, sitting straighter. "I ran my family's kitchen for years, and I've been helping Mrs. Fairchild with the meals at the boarding house." Weston studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "It's hard work, Miss O'Hara. Long days starting before dawn. The men can be a rough lot, though decent enough. It's isolated 15 miles out of town. Not much company except for the cowhands, my father and myself." "That sounds perfect," she said, perhaps too eagerly. He smiled, though there was a question in his eyes. "Most young ladies would consider such isolation a hardship." "I'm not most young ladies, Mr. Calloway." "No," he agreed, his gaze flickering briefly to her scarred cheek. "I don't believe you are." He took a sip of coffee. "When can you start?" His directness surprised her. "You're offering me the position just like that. Mrs. Fairchild vouches for your cooking, which is good enough for me. And frankly, we're desperate. The men are threatening mutiny if they have to eat my father's cooking one more week." "I could be ready tomorrow," she said, hardly believing her luck. "Excellent. I'll come by the boarding house at 7 in the morning. Pack light, I've only got my horse and a pack mule." He extended his hand across the table. "Welcome to the Circle S, Miss O'Hara." She hesitantly placed her hand in his, surprised by the gentle strength in his calloused grip. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." "Wes," he corrected with an easy smile. "Everyone calls me Wes." The following morning, Madeline waited on the porch of the boarding house with her single trunk and carpet bag. Mrs. Fairchild had tried to talk her out of taking the position, concerned about a single woman living among so many men, but Madeline was resolute. It wasn't as though she had many prospects in town. True to his word, Wes arrived precisely at 7, riding a magnificent chestnut stallion and leading a sturdy mule already laden with supplies. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Morning, Miss O'Hara," he called, tipping his hat. "Ready for your new adventure?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, rising from her seat on the porch steps. He secured her trunk to the mule's pack and offered his hand to help her mount behind him on his horse. She hesitated. "I've never ridden double before," she admitted. "It's that or the mule," he said with a grin. "And Chester here isn't known for his comfortable gait." Gathering her skirts, Madeline allowed him to help her up behind him. The intimacy of the situation made her cheeks burn as she tentatively placed her hands on his waist. "You'll want to hold tighter than that once we get moving," he advised. 15 miles is a fair distance." By the time they reached the Circle S, Madeline's arms ached from maintaining her grip, and her thighs burned from the unaccustomed posture. The ranch spread out before them, a large main house built of sturdy logs, a bunkhouse, barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. In the distance, cattle grazed on the sparse desert grasses that stretched toward the mountains on the horizon. Wes helped her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist, and she wobbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. "Legs'll get used to it," he said with a knowing smile. "Let me show you to the cookhouse." The cookhouse was a separate building near the bunkhouse, containing a large kitchen with an industrial-sized cast iron stove, a well-stocked pantry, and a dining area with 3 long tables. A small room off the kitchen would serve as her quarters, simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and a small window that looked out toward the mountains. "It's not fancy," Wes said, watching her inspect the room. "But it's private. No one will bother you here." "It's perfect," she replied honestly. After months in Mrs. Fairchild's crowded boarding house, the thought of having her own space was luxurious indeed. "I'll have one of the boys bring in your trunk. Breakfast is usually at 5, dinner at noon, and supper at 6. Between meals, you're free to do as you please, though most of our cooks have kept the coffee pot going throughout the day. The men appreciate that, especially during roundup. He paused, studying her face openly now, his gaze lingering on her scars in a way that made her want to turn away. But there was no disgust in his expression, only curiosity. "The fire that did that," he said quietly. "Was it recent?" Madeline stiffened. No one had asked so directly before. "6 months ago. My family's ranch in Colorado," he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Lost my mother to fire when I was 12. It's a terrible way to go." The simple statement, delivered without pity or awkwardness, loosened something tight in her chest. "Yes, it is." "Well," he said, breaking the somber moment with a smile, "I'll leave you to get settled. The men will be in for dinner at noon, 14 hungry cowboys who have been living on my father's cooking. They'll be easy to please today, but they'll get more discerning once they remember what real food tastes like." After he left, Madeline unpacked her few belongings and explored the kitchen, taking inventory of what was available. The pantry was well stocked with staples: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork, and preserved goods. A root cellar beneath the cookhouse held potatoes, onions, and carrots. In an ice house nearby, she found sides of beef and pork. By 11:30, she had a large pot of hearty beef stew simmering, cornbread baking in the oven, and a fresh pot of coffee brewing. As the smell of cooking food wafted across the yard, cowboys began to drift toward the cookhouse, curious about the new cook. They entered in 2s and 3s, removing their hats and eyeing her with poorly concealed surprise. Most nodded politely, though a few stared openly at her scars before quickly averting their gaze. She kept her head high, ladling stew into bowls and placing hot cornbread on plates with quiet efficiency. Wes was among the last to enter, accompanied by an older man who bore a striking resemblance to him, Samuel Calloway, she presumed the ranch owner. The elder Calloway approached her, extending his hand. "Miss O'Hara, welcome to Circle S. My son tells me you're a fine cook, and by the smell of things, he wasn't exaggerating." "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. I hope everything meets your expectations." "I'm sure it will, my dear." His eyes flickered briefly to her scars, but like his son, he showed no sign of discomfort. "We're grateful to have you." As the men ate, their initial reserve gave way to enthusiastic appreciation. Compliments on the stew and cornbread came from around the tables, and several asked for seconds and thirds. Madeline moved among them, refilling coffee cups and serving more food, gradually relaxing as she realized that while they might notice her scars, their hunger and gratitude for a good meal outweighed any curiosity about her appearance. After the meal, as the men filed out to return to their work, Wes lingered behind, helping her clear the tables. "You don't need to do that," she said, surprised by his assistance. "My mother taught me that no job is beneath any man," he replied, stacking plates. "Besides, I wanted to see how you were settling in. The men can be a bit rough around the edges." "They were perfect gentlemen," she assured him. "Good, because if any of them weren't, they'd answer to me." There was steel beneath his easy smile. For the next week, Madeline fell into the rhythm of ranch life. Up before dawn to start the fires and prepare breakfast, a brief respite mid-morning while the men were out working, then preparations for dinner, followed by a few hours' break before starting on supper. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time since the fire she felt useful, needed. The ranch hands had accepted her presence with surprisingly little fuss. Some, like young Tommy Wilson, barely 18 and new to ranch work, blushed and stammered whenever she spoke to him. Others, like the grizzled foreman Charlie Blackburn, treated her with a gruff respect. None mentioned her scars. Wes made a point of stopping by the cookhouse at odd hours, sometimes to discuss meal plans for upcoming cattle drives or special occasions, sometimes seemingly just to talk. He told her about the ranch, how his grandfather had claimed the land after the war with Mexico, how his father had expanded it, and how he hoped to modernize their operations. He asked about her life before coming to Nevada, and she found herself sharing more than she had with anyone since the fire. "My father was a failed miner who tried his hand at ranching," she explained one afternoon as she kneaded bread dough while Wes sat at the kitchen table, whittling a piece of pine wood. "He wasn't particularly good at that either, but we managed. My mother died when I was 16, and I took over running the household for my father and two younger brothers." "And the fire?" he asked gently, her hands stilled in the dough. "A lightning strike. The barn went up first. My brothers were sleeping in the loft. They'd been staying there to help a mare through a difficult foaling. My father ran in to get them out." She swallowed hard. "None of them made it. The wind carried embers to the house. I was asleep. By the time I woke, the roof was already burning. I barely got out." She didn't tell him how she'd gotten her scars, how she'd run back into the burning house, trying to save the family Bible and her mother's portrait, only to have a burning beam crash down beside her, showering her with flaming debris. How she'd lain in a neighbor's home for weeks, feverish and in pain, praying to join her family until the neighbor's wife, tired of caring for her, had told her bluntly that God had spared her for a reason, and she ought to stop feeling sorry for herself. "I'm sorry," Wes said simply. There was no pity in his voice, only understanding. "It was 6 months ago," she said, resuming her kneading with perhaps more force than necessary. "I've made my peace with it." He nodded, though his eyes told her he knew that wasn't entirely true. "Well, I for one am glad you found your way here. The men haven't eaten this well in years." The compliment, offered with his trademark easy smile, lightened the heaviness that had settled over her heart. "Even if I refuse to make your father's infamous chili, especially because you refuse to make my father's chili," he laughed. "That concoction has sent more cowboys to an early grave than stampedes and rustlers combined." As spring gave way to early summer, Madeline found herself looking forward to Wes's visits to the cookhouse. He had a way of drawing her out of her shell, making her laugh with stories of ranch mishaps or local gossip from his trips into town. Sometimes, he brought her small gifts, a ribbon for her hair from the mercantile, wildflowers he'd picked while out checking fence lines, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. She told herself he was simply being kind to an employee, that his attention meant nothing beyond friendship. After all, what man would be interested in a woman whose face and body were marred as hers were? The scars visible on her face were only a fraction of those that covered her right shoulder, arm, and side, reminders of the fire that had taken everything from her. One evening in late June, Madeline was returning to the cookhouse after taking a rare walk to the small creek that ran through the property when she heard raised voices coming from the bunkhouse. Curious, she moved closer, staying in the shadows of the barn. "All I'm saying is it ain't natural, the way he moons over her," came a voice she recognized as belonging to Hank Davis, one of the older hands. "A man like Wes could have any gal in the county, but he spends all his free time hanging around the cookhouse talking to that scarred-up woman." "Watch your mouth, Davis," growled Charlie Blackburn. "Miss O'Hara's a fine lady who's been nothing but good to us all. What happened to her face ain't her fault." "Didn't say it was," Hank retorted. "Just saying Wes is acting like a lovesick calf and it's making him soft. Yesterday he called me out for using rough language near the cookhouse. Said we needed to remember there was a lady present. Hell, he never cared before when all Pete was cooking. Pete wasn't a lady. someone else chimed in to general laughter. Maybe the boss sees something in Miss O'Hara that your sorry excuse for a brain can't comprehend, Charlie said. And maybe it's none of your damned business anyway. Madeline had heard enough. She slipped away, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. The men had noticed Wes's attentions too. It wasn't just her imagination. But Hank's words cut deep, reminding her of what she already knew. That someone like Wes, handsome and whole, could never truly be interested in someone like her. She avoided the main house and bunkhouse for the next few days, sending Tommy to deliver meals to the elder Mr. Calloway, who had taken ill with a summer cold. She made excuses when Wes came by, claiming to be too busy to chat, focusing intently on her work until he reluctantly left. On the fourth day of this treatment, Wes cornered her in the pantry as she was taking inventory of supplies. "Have I offended you somehow, Maddie?" he asked, using the nickname he'd taken to calling her despite her initial protests. "Of course not," she said, not meeting his eyes as she counted sacks of flour. "I've just been busy." "Too busy to look at me." He moved closer, ducking his head to try to catch her gaze. "Too busy for our talks. You used to enjoy them. I'm your employee, Mr. Calloway. I'm here to cook, not to entertain you with conversation." He recoiled slightly at her formal tone. "What happened? Something's changed," she sighed, setting down her pencil and inventory list. "I overheard some of the men talking. They think it's strange that you spend so much time with me." "It's causing talk." "And since when do you care what a bunch of cowboys think?" he challenged. "Since they're right," she said, finally meeting his gaze. "It is strange. You should be spending time with," she hesitated, "with women who are suitable companions for someone in your position." "Suitable?" he frowned. "What does that mean?" "You know exactly what it means," she snapped, her patience fraying. "Women who aren't, who don't look like." She gestured helplessly toward her scarred face, understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by anger. "Who said something to you?" "Was it Hank? I'll have him packing his gear by sundown." "No one said anything to me directly," she assured him. "But I'm not blind or deaf. I know what people think when they look at me. I've seen it every day since the fire. Pity, disgust, discomfort. I don't need your pity too, Wes." "Pity?" he repeated, incredulous. "You think that's what this is?" Before she could respond, he closed the distance between them, his hands gently framing her face, thumbs brushing over both her smooth skin and her scars with equal tenderness. "Madeline O'Hara, I have never pitied you for a single moment," he said, his voice low and intense. "I've admired your strength, your resilience, your quiet dignity. I've enjoyed your wit and your company. And yes, I've noticed your scars, how could I not? But they're part of you, part of your story. They show what you've survived." She stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe as his blue eyes searched hers. "I wanted to court you properly," he continued. "I thought I was being patient, giving you time to heal, to trust again. But if you think I've been spending time with you out of pity, then I've done a poor job of showing my true feelings." "And what are those feelings?" she whispered. In answer, he lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. His thumbs continued to caress her cheeks, scar tissue and smooth skin alike, as though both were equally precious to him. When he finally pulled back, Madeline was trembling, overwhelmed by emotions she'd thought long buried beneath her grief and pain. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Maddie O'Hara," Wes said softly. "Scars and all. And I'd be honored if you'd let me court you properly without hiding in the pantry to do it." A laugh escaped her, watery and uncertain. "People will talk." "Let them," he said with a shrug. "My father already thinks I'm the luckiest man alive to have caught your attention." He says any woman who makes cornbread like yours is worth her weight in gold. Your father approves? She asked, surprised. He told me not to let you get away, or he'd disown me, Wes said with a grin. Though I suspect that has more to do with your apple pie than my happiness. This time her laugh was stronger, more genuine. I'm not sure I know how to be courted. It's been a long time since I thought of myself as someone who could be loved. Then we'll figure it out together, he promised, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. Starting with a proper dinner, just the two of us. Tomorrow night, after the men have eaten, I'll cook. You? She asked skeptically. I thought you said your cooking sent men running for the hills. I may have exaggerated my culinary deficiencies to ensure you'd take the job, he admitted with a wink. I make a passable steak, and I can open a can of peaches with the best of them. Despite her reservations, Madeline found herself agreeing. The next evening, after serving the ranch hands their supper and sending them on their way, she changed into her one good dress, a simple blue cotton with white trim that she'd made herself, and let her hair down from its usual practical bun. Wes arrived at her door promptly at 7, dressed in clean clothes with his hair still damp from washing. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers and a bottle of wine. You look beautiful, he said, his appreciative gaze taking in her appearance. She fought the urge to turn her scarred side away from him. Thank you. He had set up a small table on the porch of the main house, complete with a checkered tablecloth and candles. True to his word, he served a simple but well-cooked meal: steaks, potatoes, and canned peaches for dessert. They talked easily through dinner, the initial awkwardness fading as they slipped back into the comfortable rapport they'd developed over the past months. After dinner, they sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. Wes's arm rested along the back of the swing, not quite touching her shoulders but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Tell me something you've never told anyone else, he said softly. She considered the request. Sometimes I hate them, she admitted after a moment. The scars. She nodded. Not because of how they look, but because of what they remind me of. Every time I see them, I remember that night. I remember that I lived when my family didn't. Wes was quiet for a long moment. That's survivor's guilt, he finally said. I felt it too after my mother died. I kept thinking if I'd been there instead of off fishing with friends, maybe I could have saved her. Could you have? She asked. No, he said simply. The doctor said she was overcome by smoke before the flames even reached her. Nothing I could have done would have changed that. It took me years to accept it, though. How did you? Accept it, I mean. My father told me something I've never forgotten. He said, son, the dead don't begrudge the living for surviving. They only begrudge them for not living fully with the time they've been given. Wes turned to face her more directly. Your family wouldn't want you to hate the scars that mark your survival, Maddie. They'd want you to wear them proudly, as proof that you're still here, still fighting, still living. Tears welled in her eyes at his words. She had been surviving these past 6 months, but she hadn't truly been living. She'd been hiding behind high collars and downturned faces, behind walls of grief and shame. Wes reached out, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. You don't have to hide from me, he whispered. I see you, all of you, and what I see is beautiful. In the weeks that followed, Wes courted her openly. He took her on buggy rides around the property, brought her books from his own collection, and spent evenings on the porch of the main house talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes his father joined them, sharing stories of the early days of the ranch and clearly delighting in the growing relationship between his son and the cook. The ranch hands adjusted to the situation with varying degrees of acceptance. Most, like Charlie and young Tommy, seemed genuinely happy for them. A few, including Hank Davis, maintained a disapproving distance, though a stern word from Wes ensured that no disrespect was shown to Madeline's face. As their relationship deepened, Madeline gradually began to believe that Wes truly didn't see her scars as repulsive, or even as a flaw to be overlooked. He touched them as naturally as he touched the rest of her, sometimes tracing their paths with gentle fingers while they sat together in the evening. Once, when she flinched away, he asked permission to kiss each scar, and when she hesitatingly agreed, he did so with such reverence that she wept. "They're part of your beauty," he told her that night. "They're the map of your courage." In late July, a heat wave descended on the region, turning the already arid landscape into an oven. Working in the cookhouse became nearly unbearable, despite keeping every window open. After serving breakfast one morning, Madeline was almost overcome by the heat. Wes found her sitting on the back step of the cookhouse, her face flushed and damp with perspiration. "This won't do," he declared, helping her to her feet. "You'll make yourself sick in this heat." "I have dinner to prepare," she protested weakly. "The men can survive on cold sandwiches for one day," he insisted. "I'm taking you somewhere cooler." He helped her onto his horse and mounted behind her, his arms around her waist as he guided the animal toward the mountains that bordered the ranch property. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily until the air grew noticeably cooler. Finally, they reached a small, hidden valley where a clear stream cascaded over rocks to form a series of pools. "My secret hideaway," Wes explained as he helped her dismount. "I found it when I was a boy. No one else comes here." The spot was idyllic, shaded by tall pines, carpeted with soft grass, the air cool and sweet with the scent of wildflowers. Madeline sank gratefully onto a flat rock beside one of the pools, trailing her fingers in the cold mountain water. "It's beautiful," she sighed, feeling the oppressive heat of the past days lifting from her body and spirit. Wes spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked the saddlebags, producing a simple picnic lunch of bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of cider. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the music of the stream and the wind in the pines. After lunch, Madeline removed her boots and stockings to dangle her feet in one of the pools, sighing with pleasure at the cold water against her skin. Wes watched her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head. "Just thinking how beautiful you look right now, happy, relaxed." She blushed but didn't turn away. Over the past weeks, she had grown more comfortable with his compliments, less inclined to dismiss them as mere kindness. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "It's perfect." "I've never brought anyone else," he admitted. "Not even my father knows about this place. It's always been just mine." The significance of his sharing it with her wasn't lost on Madeline. She met his gaze, seeing the love and longing there that he no longer tried to hide. "Wes," she began, her heart racing, "I think I'm falling in love with you too." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He moved to sit beside her at the edge of the pool, taking her hand in his. "I've been hoping you might," he said softly. "Because I'm not falling anymore, Maddie. I've already fallen hard and completely." This time, when he kissed her, there was a new urgency, a deeper passion that made her tremble. His hands tangled in her hair, loosening the pins until it fell in waves around her shoulders. She responded with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Wes pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children someday. Stay with me at Circle S and make it your home." "Are you sure?" she asked, the old insecurity flaring briefly. "Your father already considers you a daughter," he interrupted. He told me last week that if I didn't propose soon, he might do it himself just to keep you in the family." She laughed, joy bubbling up inside her like the clear spring water at their feet. "Then yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you, Weston Calloway." They were married in early September as the worst of the summer heat was beginning to wane. The ceremony took place at the ranch with a judge brought from Winnemucca to officiate. Samuel Calloway, beaming with pride, gave Madeline away. The ranch hands, even Hank Davis, attended in their Sunday best, and Mrs. Fairchild made the journey from town with several of her boarders. Madeline wore a simple white dress that she and Mrs. Fairchild had worked on together, with no high collar or concealing neckline. Her scars were visible for all to see, but for the first time since the fire, she didn't care. The way Wes looked at her as she walked toward him, his eyes shining with love and admiration, was all that mattered. After the ceremony, and a celebration feast that Madeline had planned meticulously, but was forbidden to cook herself, the newlyweds departed for a week-long honeymoon in San Francisco. It was Madeline's first time seeing the ocean, and Wes delighted in showing her the sights of the city. On their first night in the Grand Hotel overlooking the bay, Madeline faced a new fear, allowing Wes to see the full extent of her scars. Though they had grown increasingly intimate during their courtship, she had always kept certain parts of herself covered. Now, as his wife, there would be no more hiding. She stood nervously by the window of their hotel room, watching him move about, removing his jacket and waistcoat, rolling up his shirt sleeves. When he approached her, his expression was tender, understanding. "We don't have to rush anything," he said gently, taking her hands in his. "We have all the time in the world." "It's not that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's, you haven't seen all of me yet. The scars. They're worse than you know." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah," he said simply. "May I?" At her hesitant nod, he slowly helped her out of her wedding dress, his movements respectful and patient. When she stood before him in only her chemise, he paused, waiting for her permission to continue. With trembling fingers, she untied the ribbons herself and let the garment fall away. The scars on her right side were extensive, rippling, discolored skin that stretched from her neck down across her shoulder, breast, and ribs, continuing to her hip. She stood motionless, afraid to see disgust or pity in his eyes. But when she finally gathered the courage to look at him, she saw only reverence and love. "You are exquisite," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every part of you." He knelt before her, pressing his lips to the worst of the scars on her ribs, then worked his way upward, kissing each mark with the same tender devotion he'd shown to the ones on her face. By the time he reached her neck, tears were streaming down her cheeks, not tears of shame or sorrow, but of release, of acceptance. "I love you," he murmured against her skin. "All of you. Your scars are badges of honor, Maddie. They tell the story of your courage, your survival. How could I not love them when they are part of the woman I adore?" That night, as they consummated their marriage, Madeline finally understood what it meant to be truly seen and loved, not despite her scars, but with them as an integral part of her being. They returned to Circle S a week later to find that Samuel had had the old foreman's cabin renovated as a wedding gift, a small house of their own, separate from the main house, but close enough for convenience. It was simply but beautifully furnished, with a stone fireplace, comfortable chairs, and even a small piano that Samuel had somehow acquired and had hauled all the way from Reno. "I remember you mentioning that you played as a girl," he explained when Madeline gasped in surprise. "Thought you might like to have music in your home." She embraced her father-in-law, overcome with emotion at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for welcoming me, for accepting me." "My dear girl," Samuel said, patting her back. "You've brought light back to this ranch and joy back to my son's eyes. It is I who should be thanking you." As fall turned to winter, Madeline settled into her new role as Wes's wife and the mistress of Circle S. She still oversaw the cooking for the ranch hands, but now with the help of young Tommy's sister, Clara, who had come to work as her assistant. The arrangement gave Madeline more time to help Wes with the ranch's books and to accompany him on trips into town. The first time she returned to Winnemucca as Mrs. Calloway, she braced herself for the stares and whispers that had driven her away months before. They came, but now they slid off her like water from a duck's back. With Wes at her side, proudly introducing her as his wife, the pitying glances and averted eyes meant nothing. At Peterson's Mercantile, Mr. Peterson himself greeted them effusively, as though he'd never rejected Madeline for employment because of her scars. "Mrs. Calloway, what an honor. How may I assist you today?" She met his gaze steadily, a small smile playing at her lips. "We need supplies for the ranch, Mr. Peterson, and fabric. I'm redecorating our home." The subtle emphasis on "our home" wasn't lost on the merchant, whose face flushed slightly. Of course. "Only the best for Circle S." As they left the store laden with purchases, Wes squeezed her hand. "You handled that beautifully, much more graciously than I might have." "It doesn't matter anymore," she said honestly. "What people like Peterson think of me. It just doesn't matter." They visited Mrs. Fairchild, who embraced Madeline warmly and insisted they stay for tea. "I knew the moment I saw you two together that he was smitten," the older woman declared. "A blind man could have seen it." "Was it that obvious?" Wes asked, grinning. "You practically glowed whenever she entered the room," Mrs. Fairchild said. "And you, my dear," she turned to Madeline, "you bloomed like a flower turning toward the sun whenever he was near." Madeline blushed. "I tried to hide it, I thought. I believed no man could want me looking like this." Mrs. Fairchild tutted disapprovingly. "Beauty comes in many forms, child. Your Mr. Calloway is fortunate to have the wisdom to recognize it. Winter on the high desert was harsh but beautiful. Heavy snows blanketed the ranch, turning the landscape into a pristine white wilderness. With the cattle settled in sheltered pastures for the season and many of the hands gone to winter elsewhere, life at Circle S slowed to a peaceful rhythm. Madeline and Wes spent evenings by their fireplace, reading aloud to each other or simply talking. She taught him to play simple tunes on the piano, laughing at his clumsy attempts. He taught her to play chess, proudly losing to her natural tactical mind after only a few games. On the coldest nights, they would lie in bed wrapped in each other's arms, and Wes would trace the paths of her scars with gentle fingertips, as familiar with their contours as he was with the lines of her face. "Do they hurt still?" he asked one night, his fingers following a particularly deep scar that ran along her ribs. "Sometimes they ache when the weather changes," she admitted, "but not like they used to." He nodded thoughtfully. "My father's old war wounds are the same. He says he can predict snow 3 days before it arrives by the pain in his shoulder where the bullet went through." "At least mine are useful for something," she joked. "They're useful for many things," he countered. "They remind me every day how blessed I am that you survived, that you found your way to Winnemucca, that Mrs. Fairchild mentioned your name when I came looking for a cook." She smiled in the darkness. "Who would have thought that being rejected by Peterson's Mercantile would lead to all this happiness? Remind me to thank Peterson next time we're in town," Wes said, pulling her closer. "His loss, my incalculable gain." In early spring, as the snow began to melt and the first green shoots appeared on the willows by the creek, Madeline discovered she was with child. The ranch doctor, summoned for what she had thought was a lingering winter illness, confirmed her suspicions with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Calloway. I'd say you'll welcome a new member of the family come late autumn," she told Wes that evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the snow-capped mountains in hues of pink and gold. "A baby," he repeated, his expression stunned before breaking into the most radiant smile she'd ever seen. "We're having a baby." He gathered her into his arms, laughing and crying at once, spinning her around until she was dizzy with joy and had to beg him to stop. "Are you happy?" she asked, though the answer was written plainly on his face. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," he said, kneeling before her to place a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A child, our child." Only later, as they lay in bed, did she voice the fear that had crept into her mind. What if? What if the baby inherits my scars? Not literally, but what if something happens? Wes propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her seriously. "Then we will love that child exactly as it is, scars or no scars, just as I love you exactly as you are." The baby, a boy they named Samuel Michael Calloway, after both their fathers, was born on a clear October day with no complications. He was perfect, with Wes's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair, and all 10 fingers and toes accounted for. Madeline held him to her chest, marveling at the tiny human they had created, while Wes sat beside them on the bed, one arm around his wife and one gentle finger stroking his son's downy head. "He's beautiful," Wes whispered, "just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Madeline said, touching the baby's soft cheek. "And your father's chin, I think." Samuel Sr., upon meeting his grandson and namesake, wept unabashedly. "Your mother would be so proud," he told Wes, clapping him on the shoulder. "So very proud of the man you've become and the family you've made." As young Sam grew, so did the Circle S. Under Wes's management and with Madeline's shrewd business sense, the ranch prospered. They added new pastureland, improved their breeding stock, and built a larger bunkhouse to accommodate more hands. The cookhouse was expanded as well, with Clara Wilson promoted to head cook, while Madeline focused on running the household and raising their son. When Sam was 2, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in Denver, informing Madeline that the man who had purchased her family's burned-out ranch in Colorado had discovered a vein of silver on the property. Under the terms of the hasty sale she had made before leaving Colorado, she was entitled to a percentage of any mineral rights. "It's a fortune," Wes said in disbelief after reading the letter. "You're a wealthy woman, Mrs. Calloway." "We're wealthy," she corrected him. "What's mine is yours, remember." They decided to use some of the unexpected windfall to build a proper school on the ranch. Many of the hands had families now, living in small cabins dotted around the property, and the nearest school was in Winnemucca, too far for daily travel, especially in winter. Madeline, who had received a solid education from her mother before the woman's death, volunteered to teach until they could find a professional school teacher. To her surprise, she loved teaching and had a natural talent for it. The children, ranging from 5 to 15, adored her and seemed completely untroubled by her scars. One day, a new family arrived at Circle S, a widower named Robert Jenkins and his 3 children, hired as the new blacksmith after the old one retired. The oldest child, a girl of about 8, stared openly at Madeline's scars when they were introduced. "What happened to your face, madam?" she asked, earning a sharp reprimand from her embarrassed father. "Elizabeth, that's not polite. Apologize to Mrs. Calloway immediately." "It's all right," Madeline assured him with a smile. "It's a natural question." She knelt to the child's level. "I was in a fire when I was older than you are now. I was very lucky to escape, but the fire left these marks on me." "Did it hurt?" Elizabeth asked, her eyes wide. Yes, it did. Very much, but not anymore. The girl nodded solemnly. I have a scar too, she said, rolling up her sleeve to reveal a jagged line on her forearm. From when I fell out of a tree. Papa says scars just show we're brave. Your papa is a wise man, Madeline said, glancing up at the blacksmith with a warm smile. Scars do show we're brave, and that we survived something difficult. Later, when Wes asked about the newcomers, Madeline recounted the exchange with little Elizabeth. She reminded me of myself at that age, curious, unafraid to ask questions. You've come a long way from the woman who hid her face behind her bonnet brim in Winnemucca, Wes observed, wrapping his arms around her waist. I had help, she said, leaning back against his chest. A very persistent, very handsome cowboy who refused to let me believe the lies I'd been told about myself. Sounds like a remarkable fellow, Wes murmured against her hair. Should I be jealous? She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his beloved face. Never. My heart is entirely yours, Weston Calloway. It has been since that first day when you caught me before I fell off the boardwalk. Best catch I ever made, he said, kissing her tenderly. And I intend to keep holding on for the rest of our lives. 3 years later, Madeline gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose, with Madeline's auburn hair and sweet disposition. Young Sam, now 5, appointed himself his sister's protector, solemnly promising his father that he would watch over her always. As the children grew, so did the legend of Circle S. Under the Calloway's management, it became known not just as one of the most successful ranches in northern Nevada, but as a place where everyone was welcome regardless of their past or their appearance. Samuel Sr., though slowing with age, remained a vital part of the operation, beloved by his grandchildren who followed him everywhere, listening raptly to his stories of the early days. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Wes surprised Madeline with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their children on one side and a lock of his hair on the other. It's beautiful, she said as he fastened it around her neck. But why today? Our anniversary isn't for another month. Today is a different anniversary, he explained. 10 years ago today was when I first saw you on the boardwalk in Winnemucca, the day you literally fell into my arms. She was touched that he remembered the exact date. You caught me then, she said softly, and you've been catching me ever since whenever I start to fall. And I always will, he promised, drawing her close. For as long as I live, I'll be there to catch you. That night, as they sat on the porch of their home, no longer the small cabin but a larger house they had built as their family grew, watching their children play with their grandfather in the yard, Madeline reflected on how far she had come from that broken, scarred young woman who had arrived in Winnemucca with nothing but grief and pain. What are you thinking about? Wes asked, noticing her pensive expression. About how one moment can change everything, she said. If I hadn't been looking down that day on the boardwalk, if you hadn't been there at that exact moment, I believe we would have found each other somehow, he said with quiet conviction. Some things are just meant to be. Like a scarred woman and a cowboy, she teased. Like two people who needed each other, he corrected gently. Two halves of the same whole. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land that had become her home, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that he was right. They had been meant for each other, her scars and his strength, his laughter and her resilience, their love creating something beautiful and enduring in this harsh and beautiful land. She had been told her scars made her unlovable, but Weston Calloway had proven that love sees beyond the surface, beyond the marks left by fire and pain. He had loved her scars and all, not despite them, but including them in the whole of who she was. And in his love, She had found not just acceptance but celebration of her complete self. As their children raced toward them, faces flushed with play and eyes bright with joy, Madeline reached for Wes's hand. Together they rose to gather their family close, whole and happy in the home they had built with love, understanding, and the courage to see beyond scars to the beauty that lay beneath.